Hello, peoples of the internet, and welcome to another Stairway Mountain time trial, where today we are taking the slowest vehicle of the day. It is a base model D-Series, although this is not like the base model D-Series reviewed before, as you may have seen back there. This one has the 2.3 litre Ford EcoBoost engine, I believe from the Ford Fiesta ST. It's an odd engine though. It feels like it has no power, like you're dealing with a 120-ish horsepower engine most of the time, which doesn't get the vehicle going at all. Until you get to the high RPMs, and then it gives you a sudden surge of uncontrollable power. I mean, you can try and wide the turbo by keeping the revs up, but it just doesn't work very much of the time. You can sometimes wide the turbo out of corners. There's one example, I believe, where I did this, but for the most part you're just left feeling powerless. Hence why this vehicle is slightly slower than the inline 6 on the leaderboard, despite not having the massive crash that that vehicle had. But yeah, it's scary. It did, however, feel somewhat more controllable and better balanced than the inline 6, obviously without the sudden turbo surges, probably because the engine's almost half the size of a 4.2 litre inline 6, and it means there's less weight over the front end, and we're talking about a vehicle here with no weight over the rear end, so taking any amount of weight off the front should give the rear more grip. I had a few knocks and bumps on this one, but the truck took it surprisingly well. And yeah, what more can I say? It's a turbo truck which doesn't have near as much turbo as I would like. I got it to the end, and other than a smashed radiator and damaged bumpers, it was pretty much perfect, because if I did drive this crazily, it would die or fly off a cliff when the turbo cuts in, which I believe may have happened once. So, with all being said and done, on to the next vehicle. Now, the next car we have is an Ibishu Pessima 2 litre Turbo Sport. Only this one is not actually a 2 litre Turbo Sport. It's a 2.7 litre V6 Sport with the 2 litre Sport turbo engine swapped in. Why have I done this? Because the 2 litre Sport breaks the suspension upon spawn. I don't know why, and I don't know why my brain took so long to think of that word. Anyway, it's a nice vehicle to drive, and the engine has a good amount of punch, more than the base model's 1.8 litre engine. The only problem is the brakes. You probably saw this coming, but it's powered by Wheels of Cheese, Harry Potter, or Magic, or a combination of all the above, because it just doesn't get stopped. You try and step on the brakes and nothing happens, as you saw there, which was a quite annoying moment. And it did take its toll on the car. I mean, most of the scuffs and bumps it had by the end were caused by braking too late with this, which is not a difficult task given how terrible the brakes are. It did go around corners better though than I remember the base model because of the sport suspension. It also set a time around 20 seconds quicker than that, which was good. However, it's the brakes that really hold it back. Had it had some better brakes, it could probably do 25 seconds quicker easily. But with these brakes, they really hold it back and stop it getting a better time on the leaderboard. Thankfully, either this engine does not have the same tendency to set on fire as the V6. If you remember, on both V6 Pessimas I used, both of them set on fire quite easily. This does not, so you're not driving a death trap in this case, which is always nice to know. I did set on fire once and randomly have fire coming out the pavement for no reason after I'd set on fire, But other than that, it was a pretty normal vehicle to drive, which I guess is what Ibishu was going for. And when I got to the end, there were just a few scuffs, which, as I said, were caused by braking poorly. And there's not really much I can say about it. Apart from the brakes being terrible, it's a nice vehicle that I would recommend using. On to the next vehicle. Next up we have what's perhaps the lowest car on my leaderboard, as in not the car at the bottom of the leaderboard, but the one that sits the closest to the ground. This gives it the odd difficulty when you go over a jump and smack down the front on the ground and you just hear a whole lot of crunching. I mean, really, it's even if you just go off a curb and then land on all your wheels again, you can hear crunching, and it's always terrifying because I fear I might have destroyed a tyre or the suspension, thus completely destroying the car. It's unlikely though, it's mainly just the bodywork. Speaking of which, I believe it has some fancy aerodynamics going on. It does feel quite planted to the ground when you take corners. It's quite a nice feeling. However, with the suspension being so stiff on this, you can go up a curb and roll it at times, which is annoying. All things considered though, this car did make it into the under 8 minute gang, just ahead of the Gavril Super Sport van, and it's quite a good time overall, although I think it could do better. I'm guessing it's just the suspension being too stiff and too low made it come behind the Covet, but what more can I say? It's a good vehicle to drive, it's very front wheel drive, I don't believe it has ABS, and it's a vehicle I would recommend. Made quite a nice race car actually. When I got this to the end eventually, it actually survived pretty well. The jump as well was surprisingly well taken given that it's such a low stiff vehicle. Although the front suspension might have collapsed, it's hard to tell when a car's this low whether the suspension has or hasn't collapsed. The bodywork was definitely a bit damaged. As I said, that smacks itself onto the ground, makes a whole load of crunching noises, and it's not too good for a bumpy track like this. On to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the 80s Pessima all-wheel steer touring car. It's a very nice vehicle to drive actually, probably the nicest front-wheel drive in the game, and it feels like a four-wheel drive somewhat. It just has far more turning than you would expect from a front-wheel drive car, and it's actually the new fastest front-wheel drive. It beat the race Covet by just over 5 seconds, and I think it owes a lot to that all-wheel steer system. Also, the brakes are okay. They're not anti-lock brakes, but they do a decent job of stopping the car nonetheless. And overall, it's just a good vehicle to drive. It drives as a touring car should drive. It drives actually like I would imagine a BTCC vehicle to drive. It really is that good. And yeah, what more can I say about it? There's not anything particularly wrong with it, hence why it's at a good time. And it's a nice vehicle to drive as well. I got to the end and it survived quite well. It had a bit of damage here and there, but overall a nice vehicle to drive. It didn't take too many runs to get a good run with it. On to the next vehicle. Okay, so here we have the SBR S2TT, which is stage 2 twin turbos which are mounted up on the 4-cylinder engine, flat 4 in this case, as opposed to the inline 4s we've been using in other parts of this video. Anyway, it's very quick, and I'm not smart enough to know what to do with the power, thus it ends up being a bit all over the place, and I do end up smashing it up. I even cut a corner at one point because I was unable to get it to turn in, and then I just realised I needed more turning angle because the steering was a bit broken. That was at a later point in date though, but I decided to let myself off for that because I'm not a good driver and I wasn't going to get to the end again with any ease. It took many tries to get the good one with this. Thankfully, however, when I did eventually get the good one, it was very fast. It was one of the leader cars. It was under 8 minutes 40 even. 7 minutes 40 rather. So, very quick, if you can keep it under control, which is something I couldn't do. On to the next vehicle. Next up we have the Hirochi Sunburst. In this case it's the race DCT, which stands for dual clutch transmission. The reason I'm not using a manual is because for whatever reason the engine just doesn't work at all on that. But it works perfectly fine on the DCT, so I'm just needing to bear a bit more weight in order to use a car. And that was the closest I could get to that wall without damaging the driveline properly. If you looked closely, you'd see the mirror just flew into the window, broke that, and then continued on its way. Anyway, the vehicle is okay to drive. It's got over 300 horsepower apparently. They don't give a specific number on the, wiki, but yeah, it's plenty of power for a 4-wheel drive system. And if you've been following the structure of the video, you'll know this vehicle is quick. It's the second quickest vehicle on our leaderboard, and it's only within 1 second of the ETK Rocket 900, which is mighty impressive because you're looking at something that might have 310, 320 horsepower, and it goes up against a 900 horsepower estate car and doesn't come off that bad. It isn't perfect though. It's a struggle to keep this power under control. I'd say a bit less of a struggle than the SBR4, just due to the nature of it. It's a more stable car, I think, with just having less power alone, that makes it more stable. And it's nice to drive, but it will break if I take it too far. You saw with the SBR4, that thing was a bit more resilient, I would say, because the engine was in the back. This is not. It will break the radiator if you're not careful, and then overheat everything. But then, so will most front engine cars, to be honest. And it's good. I got to the end, and it didn't incur much damage, actually, because I had a very clean run this time. It was surprising, even for me, that I could get it down as cleanly as I did, but I somehow managed it, so I guess I'm proud of that, and the car survived. And that's all I've got for this episode, so until next week, goodbye, everyone.